Good morning, everyone. This is our workshop for the Atmos Energy's first gas infrastructure plan. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Rosati for some opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I believe we have Ms. Kunkel helping us out with running the workshop today.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, good morning. Could you confirm that the workshop webcast is up and running?
Yes, it is.
Thanks. Yes, I'm Wendy Rosati, Commission Counsel, and I'm joined by Jesse Chula, Ron Davis, and Mike Mendelson of the Commission's advisory staff. Before handing the workshop discussion back over to them, I'll give a bit of background and some information on what advisors anticipate for this workshop. In accordance with Commission Rule 4552, Atmos filed its GIP in this proceeding as a miscellaneous filing. So this is a miscellaneous proceeding that is governed by the processes set forth in the rule and by Commission Decision Number C24-0259 that opened the proceeding. In that decision, the Commission directed that a workshop be held with Commission advisory staff and Atmos and the other parties to discuss questions on Atmos's filing and to help advisory staff in its development of a report that will be used by the Commission in its ultimate decision in this proceeding. Under Rule 4552, at the end of this proceeding, the Commission will issue a decision regarding the adequacy of the GIP and the methods and processes used to formulate the GIP, and will provide guidance to be used for the preparation of future filings. With that in mind, advisors intend to ask questions of Atmos and the parties in order to best inform the commissioners on what Atmos's current infrastructure planning processes are and to learn what the opportunities are in this area. The hope is that this can be a conversation between advisory staff and Atmos and the other parties, rather than just questions and answers. A couple housekeeping items before we start. This session is being recorded and is currently being webcast through the Commission's website. In the event that a confidential session is necessary, Ms. Kunkel will assist us in turning off the webcast. The confidential session will be recorded and will be maintained and distributed following the workshop. And the confidential recording will be subject to the confidentiality provisions in the Commission's rules and the applicable non-disclosure agreements. I also remind participants that there will be opportunity for further comments in this proceeding, so things discussed here today can be followed up in writing. Are there any logistics the parties need to discuss up front? Like availability of personnel or anything? Okay, hearing nothing, I will turn it back over to advisors.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Rosati. And I'm working on my, if it's hard to hear me, just let me know. I'm going to work on getting that better after I do this quick introduction. So good morning. And as a quick note, good morning. My name is Jesse Shula, and I'm an advisor with the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, joined by Mr. Mendelson and Mr. Davis, also of the advisory staff. As a quick note, for those of you on the call that haven't already done so, if you could edit your Zoom name to include your organization, that would be helpful for me, at least throughout the day. As Mr. Rosati said, we'll be asking questions this morning to learn more about Atmos's process to create this inaugural gas infrastructure plan. And we have some specific questions about the contents of the gas infrastructure plan application to inform recommendations for Commission guidance on this and future gas infrastructure plans. What I'd first like to do is do a quick round of introductions. When you introduce yourself, please just share your name and the current role at your organization. Then Mr. Mendelson and I will start with questions about the process generally and then projects specifically. We'll have a break for lunch from 12 to 1 Mountain Time. And if and as needed, we'll continue on after lunch. And then we are trying to mostly keep our questions outside of the confidential materials. That being said, there are a few areas that sort of touch on some of those confidential materials that were filed. And so as we need to have a confidential session, like Mr. Rosati said, we will go ahead and do that. We're also joined by representatives from the Utility Consumer Advocate in the Colorado Energy Office, who are parties to this proceeding and have submitted initial comments. Our intention is that, time permitting, after Mr. Mendelson and I ask questions on a particular topic we will ask representatives from those organizations if they have any follow-on questions related to the questions posed by Mr. Mendelson and I. So maybe we'll have those of you from Atmos Energy go first. Well, yeah, go first with your introductions. So again, name and your current role. This will just be helpful for us throughout the day. Thanks.
Hello, good morning. I'm happy to introduce the entire team for Atmos Energy, if that's okay. And folks can just kind of pop onto the camera and wave. My name is Kathleen O'Connor. I'm the Vice President of Rates and Regulatory for our Colorado and Kansas Division for Atmos Energy. On the call with me today, I've got John Willis, who is our Vice President of Technical Services, Juan Arias, who is our Manager of Engineering Services, Gerard Weston, who is our Senior Rate Analyst, Mayes Erickson, who is our in-house counsel, and then I've got Nick Stoffel and Christine Roach, who is also with Atmos on outside counsel. So that is the Atmos Energy team on the call today.
Great, thank you. And I'm seeing one person from the Consumer Advocate. Could you go ahead, or at least one person? Could you go ahead and introduce yourself if you're here with the Consumer Advocate?
Good morning. On behalf of the Utility Consumer Advocate, this is Tom Dixon. I'm an Attorney General, or I should say an Assistant Attorney General. And also joining today is Leslie Henry Sermos, who is a analyst for the UCA, and she will be on this recording or on this presentation as well. I don't believe we have anyone else on from the UCA.
Great, thank you. And then if anyone is on the line from, if anyone is on the line from the Colorado Energy Office, could you go ahead and introduce yourself as well? Okay, they might be joining later. Ms. O'Connor, apologies if you already introduced Mayes Erickson. Is this person a member of Atmos? Okay, I was trying to go through, but must have missed that. Okay, then I think everyone is present and accounted for. So with that, we will go ahead and start questions. I'd like to turn it over to Ms. O'Connor for to lay a foundation for how Atmos Energy developed the gas infrastructure plan and just generally how you approach that effort.
If it's with your approval, I'm going to turn both my audio and video off. And in the event I wish to speak, I'll just turn my video on. And that way you don't have to worry about raising hands and all that. Is that acceptable as an approach?
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right. And Leslie Henry Sermos would also do the same thing. So we'll keep our cameras off unless we.
Sounds great.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so before we kick off the question and answer portion of the workshop, I just wanted to briefly lay out the foundation on how Atmos developed our GIP filing. So Atmos Energy, our vision is to be the safest provider of natural gas services, and we have an obligation to provide safe and reliable service to our customers and our communities. So Atmos Energy's GIP is guided first and foremost by the Pipeline Safety Regulatory Framework developed by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, so known as PHMSA. And in compliance with many of those federal rules and directives, Atmos Energy's Distribution Integrity Management Program explicitly lists its distribution facilities replacement program, where operating divisions plan and prioritize replacements of facilities to mitigate various threats and risks. So in collaboration with the Commission, we developed the System Safety and Integrity Rider, which we refer to as our SSIR, which systematically identifies the risks on our distribution system and eliminates the highest relative risk through pipe replacement, focused on bare steel mains and associated services. So each project in the GIP has a prioritization factor assigned from the SSIR prioritization model. And so the need for continued investment in this systematic replacement is evident in the risks we presented on our distribution system in Colorado. As presented in our plan, over 90% of the bare steel mains in the distribution system of investor-owned utilities are in Atmos Energy service territory. And so to develop this GIP, we relied on our capital investment plans and budgets as of October of 2023, and planned projects were identified and categorized consistent with the Commission's GIP rules. In this initial GIP, all of our planned projects are categorized as system safety and integrity related. And as can be explained in more detail by Mr. Willis, during the plan period, we analyzed these projects for system improvement and growth projects, and there were none. Atmos Energy does not speculate in its distribution planning load growth in Colorado, And so that's why we saw 0 projects in that growth for growth projects in that time frame. Atmos Energy also, this is consistent with our experience over the last 5 years. When we look at our capital investment, over $1 million, in the last 5 years, we spent about $86.9 million, and 96% of that was related to our SSIR. We had 3 projects that were $1 million, and that was, 2 public improvement projects and 1 system improvement project. And so this is also consistent with what we provided in the rulemaking, and looked at it again in preparing for this workshop, and again, found nothing in those categories. For our forecast required by the GIP rules, we relied on forecasts included within our recent clean heat plan, which were updated in this proceeding on May 2nd. And so during the forecasted period for the GIP, we don't anticipate any utility capital expenditures in categories over other than the system safety and integrity to exceed the $3 million threshold for planned projects, which are the subject of this GIP. Modernizing Atmos Energy's natural gas distribution system enhances safety and reliability, and is also expected to reduce emissions. So this wraps up my opening remarks. And so thank you, and we look forward to continuing the discussion. So I'll pass it back to you, Jesse.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, I don't think I have any questions on this overview. That was a really helpful, but it looks like Mr. Dixon might.
Just in the nature of kind of an opening comment, and I realize that the Atmos plan has no planned projects that meet the criteria to be disclosed, other than the system safety and integrity projects, which are detailed in confidential attachment E. Our concern is it appears you have no capacity expansion and no new business projects, and yet in your clean heat plan, particularly, you stated that a significant challenge with reducing emissions is that the company has experienced a significant growth. And so I just point out to you that tends to suggest that there must be some capacity expansion or new business projects, and potentially they are all under $3 million each. And so I just want to say that that tends to send up an issue for us, because if you do have significant customer growth, and I'm looking at page 8 of your clean heat plan, and it describes the growth as being, I think, 17% since 2015, if my memory's right. It just makes me wonder, how are you going to meet that growth without having any planned projects of 3 million or more? So I throw that out right up front as an issue that we have. And I also made some references to coils in our comments, and we can discuss that later as well. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention up front, to be fair and not wait till we're well into the process, and might bring this toward the end. So that's my reason, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to present.
Great,
I can respond on that one. I mean, first, we're talking about planned projects, which under the commission's rules are defined as utility capital investment. Colorado clearly has sent a policy message that growth should pay for growth. That is not a policy that Atmos has fought. That is a policy that Atmos has accepted. And so you're talking about a situation where new main investments or new services related to growth will be funded by those customers. And so I think that's one of the challenges that is happening here, is we're saying, oh, here's what the company is planning to spend above 3 million on safety, system, and integrity. That's a different question of, do customers in Colorado continue to have an appetite to spend their own money on new gas service? And that's a line the commission drew in establishing the gas infrastructure plan rules, that the focus was on utility capital investment, not private capital investment.
Well, perhaps we could pick up there a little bit. Could we turn to the primary map in your, and I could bring it up if that would be helpful, or you can.
Are you referring to attachment A? Is that one, or?
Well, it's in your,
In the actual plan?
in the actual plan. It's the second map. It's on page 3.
I can do the document driving if that's helpful.
Okay, that would be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, I can do know, that's
Just
page 3.
Give me 1 second and I can give you those permissions. Hold on 1 second.
And I just wanted to ask you, I understand this is slightly outside of what's officially required in the GIP rules, but can you explain how you take gas from interstate pipelines and or public service for each of your regions?
Certainly, John, is that one you're comfortable addressing?
Of course, I'm ready. Was Kristen gonna pull up the map?
Yep.
Okay, so sure, I'll just kind of walk through a little bit. So again, I'm John Willis. I'm the Vice President of Technical Services. I'm here in Denver. I've actually lived in Denver since 2004 in this role. So I'm kind of responsible for large capital projects for the last 20 years. And so I kind of have a pretty good feel for what we've done and how we've gotten to where we are. So let me just kind of explain about the way we operate in Colorado. We're truly an LDC, a local distribution company. We don't have any transmission line. We don't have lines that go from town to town. We literally get all our gas at a town border station in our service area. And it's really usually either from CIG, Northwest Pipeline, Tallgrass, and Piesco. And so those are the main suppliers. And really, if we go to, if you don't mind, if we could go to attachment A, I could kind of walk through, we basically have 6 different operating areas. And I'd kind of like to walk through those if you don't mind. And it'll kind of explain how each area is configured with our suppliers. And so let's go ahead and go to, I guess it's the next page.
Great, thank you.
All right. Okay, so that's the map you basically just saw. This, if you look at a blue, you can see the 6 areas that we mostly operate in, and they're listed with page 2 will be the next one, which is, we'll start with Weld County in that area. Okay, so this kind of gives you an idea of where we are. We're kind of east of I-25. We cover Weld County, the Greeley service area. And so this is our largest service area, and it's really supplied by 2 different suppliers. But let me take a step back. Prior to 2012, Piesco supplied all of Weld County. They were the only ones. There's different take points across our system. And then in 2012, Tallgrass ran a line down I-25 basically, and they ended up being our supplier for the next 10 years. So from 2012 through 2021, it was just Tallgrass. And so they have their system infrastructure built in Weld County so that they could provide 100% of our supply. And again, prior to that, Piesco provided 100% of our supply. So in the last 3 or 4 years, we basically have been taking gas from both suppliers. And so the fact that we're only taking half of what we were basically from each supplier, we feel pretty comfortable that either one of them has upstream capacity if we needed it, but we don't. But we're confident that there's the supply points available to us. So in Weld County, we basically have distribution pressure systems to our customers, which are basically 60-pound and less systems. The thing about Weld County is, in Greeley, is we have a high pressure system that basically goes around the town that we take our own gas off, and it's really it's rated for 175. So we have a high pressure, large steel line that kind of is kind of like our backbone through Weld County, and it feeds our 60-pound distribution systems. Where we're confident is the fact that we only operated at 150 pounds. The last couple of years, we've had a couple of really cold spells, and we were fine operating at 150 pounds. So with that said, we're comfortable that growth in our existing area off of our existing infrastructure, we have about 25 pounds of good pressure between 150 to 175. And so that's the reason why we feel confident about the system we have today for the future. So that's really Weld County. If you don't mind,
Sorry,
yes,
just to interrupt you. There are no pipelines on this map, right? These are just roads and waterways. Is that
correct? That's the service area that we serve.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you, so to the extent you did have growth and were projecting growth, and then would therefore potentially need more capacity upstream from either public service or an interstate pipeline, um, uh, would um, would they potentially need would you have to either reserve more capacity through one of those entities, or they would even have to potentially um, invest in capacity expansion of their own system to serve your local needs?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to speak on behalf of a supplier, but again, I go back to both of them, their pipelines provided 100% of our need. And now they're only supplying half of that basically between each one of them.
Right.
So I can't imagine their upstream not having bandwidth to give us a little bit more if it was needed.
But to the extent your system was growing, as would you consider upstream capacity expansion or upstream reservation payments part of your capacity expansion costs? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think if they had that, you're right, it would, but then we'd go to the other supplier.
Right. But so presently you're paying capacity payments or reservation payments on each system, right? And you're keeping that to a minimum. But if your system was growing, you might have to actually pay more.
Sure. And I think we will get into that. We will get into that on the section. I can't remember. I think it's probably attachment E, but we will cover that. We're going to show you what we have as far as subscribed on each system and what we need on each system, and you can see the room we have.
I think the other important distinction to keep in mind there is the Atmos distribution system could expand to accommodate growth for transportation customers who are responsible for their own upstream capacity. And so you've got this question about, okay, to the extent material growth is occurring that's causing some need for additional upstream capacity, is that Atmos as the customer on the upstream pipeline, or is that a new cement plant that has a big demand for gas that is using Atmos as their final distribution component, but is actually responsible for their own upstream supply and commodity supply?
Understood. Okay, I appreciate that comment. And if you want to scroll through the remaining yeah.
So we'll go to the next one, which is really it's the northwest area that we serve. And if you look, it starts at the far left, basically of Meeker, and it goes through Craig, and it gets up to basically Steamboat Springs. And so this is only fed by PSCO, and the line actually travels across the state from the west, and it literally dead ends in Steamboat Springs. And we're basically the only customer on this line for PSCO, unless they have their own customer that's not in one of the blue areas. Like if it's not a certificated area by Atmos, they might have a customer on that. I wouldn't know. That would be their pipeline in their operating area. But to give you an idea, this line goes all the way across, basically all the way across the Steamboat Springs, and we have subscribed all the gas on it that we can. Several years, and again, we will go through it and you'll see how much bandwidth we have available for future growth in Steamboat Springs and this system on the Northwest. Several years ago, a compressor was installed basically outside of Craig on their system that, once you installed it, it made a jump in capacity. And so now we're at a really healthy spot, and we'll get into that later as well. So we don't really have any concerns about upstream capacity in this area, and you'll see that as we get into our model of gas supply, subscribe, and current needs in this plan over the next 5 years. So that's the Steamboat Northwest.
Okay.
We'll go to the next. We'll go to the next one, which is basically, I believe it's Central. Yeah, so it's Salida, Buena Vista, and then it goes over to the left. There's Gunnison all the way up to Crested Butte. And again, going through the BV and Poncha Springs, Salida area is Piesco's line, and they provide us gas in that area off their system. They have a lateral that goes over to Gunnison, and it literally goes up to Crested Butte and dead ends in Crested Butte. So we're the only customers on the Gunnison and Crested Butte portion of their lateral, their line. And again, we'll go into the capacity that's available there. This was another example of trying to get more capacity on our system where 5 or 6 years ago, Piesco installed a compressor in the Gunnison area that allowed us to have the capacity that we need for the near future, as you'll see later. We'll go to the next one. So this is Canyon City, and it's fed by CIG. And it comes off of their line basically on the east side of our operating area. And they are the only supplier in that area as well. Again, we don't have any transmission line. We literally take gas off of an interstate or intrastate pipeline, and we take it to our distribution system. We have 2 more areas. We'll go to the southwest next. So we serve Durango and Cortez. And Mancos is, I believe, right there in the middle. And Dove Creek is up farthest to the northwest. And so this is basically fed by Northwest Pipeline in this area. And so they are the supplier for what we call the southwest area, which is Durango and Cortez service area. And then we'll go to the last area, which is our southeast portion of the state. And it butts right up to the Kansas border. This is basically Lamar. And as you notice, it's really spread out across a lot of small communities that we serve. And so those are basically our service areas in the state and how we get upstream supply to our distribution systems.
Mm-hmm.
I could just add another kind of detail here. So Atmos operates with 3 gas cost adjustment areas. So the supply is broken up into 3 different regions in the state. But for the JIP, it was actually broken out into 6. So you're getting kind of a more granular look from an infrastructure standpoint than is what happens from a gas supply and upstream capacity standpoint.
And does public service or any of the interstates require you to make a forecast so that they can do their planning for your transmission needs?
So every couple of years, our gas supply department subscribes gas if needed, and they work directly with the supplier. And a lot of that is based on, if we're getting into it, it's attachment G, where we hire a third-party consulting group. And what they do is they determine a 1 in 30 look of potential cold weather on our heating degree days. And then that's used by our gas supply department to see if they need to subscribe additional capacity. And then they work directly with the supplier on that subscription.
John, does Atmos have to provide a forecast though, or you just subscribe to the capacity you identify that you need, and that's what you have rights to?
Right. We basically subscribe to it. It's not a forecast. It's a commitment by us that we're subscribing that. We provide it to the PUC. We go through different reviews of it, and it is subscribed. It's not forecasted. It's actual, basically subscription on their pipeline.
And I don't know how much the commission has gotten into this and other gas infrastructure plans, but yeah, I think it's important to think about the FERC Natural Gas Act framework that applies to these intrastate pipelines. And there's kind of 2 components. You essentially have a competitive bidding process for capacity when it's available or for new construction through an open season. And then you've got a certification requirement, a construction approval requirement at FERC to expand these pipelines. And so it's not that any of these upstream investments would be happening completely outside of a regulatory review or demonstrated need, but that it's subject to an entirely different framework at the federal level.
Understood. I guess what I was trying to get at is, are the costs let's see, of committing to upstream pipe incorporated in your decision making and your evaluation of potential options to growth that you're seeing within your LDC borders. Your mic is off.
Nick, you're muted.
Thank you. Had to happen at some point. Didn't want to sneeze. John, does it happen that if a large new load wants to locate in an area that's constrained upstream, does Atmos say you can't provide service to them?
No, what we do is we put it, usually it's going to be a transportation customer, and we ask them, do they have a subscription on the supplier's pipeline? So it goes through a multiple iteration process where they contact them, they'll have a marketer, they'll find out, is there available capacity from the supplier? They let us know what their capacity is going to be and where they're going to be on our system. And then we go through the process of the custody transfer point between the supplier and us. Is that meter size property to handle that additional capacity? Where are they going to be on our system? Does our system have enough infrastructure that we can supply the gas to them? And any of those charges that would be incurred would then be paid for by that transportation customer, not by Atmos.
Well, maybe if you could explain if you are seeing any growth that you're seeing, is that coming through sales or transportation service?
Right.
Where is that coming?
So for this plan, it's coming through, our plan only includes our customers, our known customers. And so I think if you go to, I guess it's attachment H, probably go straight to it.
And that, John, that's a confidential one. So you
Oh,
save getting into
sorry.
that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In that one, it actually shows our growth, and it's tied to our clean heat plan. And so the clean heat plan did propose, I think as Mr. Dixon did indicate, it did show growth. And so in this attachment, we used those customer count changes for residential, commercial, for the 6 areas that I just described. And we built that into our base low and high forecast for this plan. Okay. And so that growth, they had an annualized number. We had to do a peak day number to determine whether or not our infrastructure could handle it. And as you go through that, you would look and see that the increase according to our clean heat plan, we are able to supply that within our current subscription from our suppliers. And that's the reason we're confident there's no upstream need. They would never know. We could go the next 5 years and do this incremental increase and live within the current infrastructure that we have and the current commitment on supply that we have.
Okay. And yeah, if we can get into this document a little more thoroughly. Oh, can you explain quickly why did you consider this document confidential?
I would pass that to Nick.
So my understanding, yeah, it's a good question. There's a different justification for the information that was identified as confidential in the filing. My understanding on this one and why it was confidential in the gas infrastructure plan context instead of the clean heat context is because of that conversion that John was talking about. In the clean heat, it is entirely on annual volumes, where here we're presenting it as a peak number. And that peak number then is what Atmos needs to know to go engage in the competitive process to secure upstream capacity if they've got additional needs. So I think that's the challenge with the different type of information we're going to go through here, like project estimate details have an entirely different justification. But for this one, it was specifically converting forecasted needs to potential upstream capacity, so forecasted throughput to upstream capacity needs. And then the fact that Atmos participates in a competitive market to secure upstream capacity on behalf of its customers.
Okay, understood. Appreciate that. And just quickly on this attachment before, without looking at it specifically, but it looks to me like there's a high forecast and the low forecast is repeated twice without a base forecast. Is that on purpose, or is that an accident, or am I misreading that?
Great observation, and it was on purpose. Again, we're trying to tie to the clean heat plan, and during the clean heat plan process, that's what was submitted by Atmos. And so I wanted to match exactly, and that's the reason why those two are the same. If you go into the clean heat plan, that's where the explanation would be between the two. But I was really trying to tie it together, and that's the reason why they are the same. They were the same in the clean heat plan.
Okay. And I apologize, I'm not familiar with your clean heat plan. Not assigned to that one. Maybe if you could just quickly explain what is the basis for your customer count forecast? Is that just based on historical growth, or is there what's factored into your growth estimates?
Right. A lot of it has to do with historical and the trending, and the group that put this together, as far as growth in the clean heat plan, they looked at a lot of trends, and then they projected it out over the next years through 2029.
And it's not purely a historical, given the policy changes in the state and the factors that need to be considered for the clean heat forecast. I mean, that's what this is all based on. Atmos actually filed supplemental testimony and a supplemental forecast in that proceeding. That was 23A-0662G. And so there's a lot more detail around the forecast, including customer counts and volumes in that supplemental testimony.
Okay, appreciate that. I would like to get into, well, you have sales requirements, and feel free to stop me if you're uncomfortable with it, but sales requirements and then design date capacity requirements. And it looks that if you look at sales, it represents a very high percentage of design date capacity volumes. And I guess I was unclear of what the relationship would be between sales and design date volumes.
Yeah. Would you like to say this for the confidential part so I could really walk through it with you?
Just so you know that one's coming.
Yeah, if you look, there were 3 different colors. There's basically a blue, a green, and an orange.
Yeah.
I'll gladly walk you through the methodology of those during a confidential session.
Okay, appreciate that. I was wondering if you could just give us a sense of your total rate base and depreciation levels based on your last rate case, or
that was not included in this plan. This was really more about, it was really focused just on the infrastructure, what triggers a need for it. I mean, I was looking at it just from the technical perspective of what do we have to do. None of this is based on or built on any type of rate-based mechanism or anything. It's what do we need to do to comply with the GIP sections that were requested.
Kat, do you have those details handy from the last rate case?
Yeah, I've got the rate base. I think our rate base coming out of the last rate case was about 230 million. Depreciation, I don't have that handy.
What was the last rate case proceeding?
It was in 2022.
It was 22AL0348G.
Jesse, you want to pick it up from there?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. All right. I want to jump into some forecasting questions. And I know you were already saying that you're trying to match to the clean heat plan. So to the extent that your answer is go look in the clean heat plan, that's okay. But just wanted to sort of talk about the forecast consideration of state and local building codes, changes in line extension policies, building electrification programs offered by the local electric utility or local or federal entities, price elasticity of demand, and any other known factors, just to kind of get an understanding of how you all were thinking about that in the formation of this gas infrastructure plan. So let's just kind of go one by one. Can you talk about the extent to which you are including the impact of state and local building codes in this forecast and whether that had impact?
Sure, I'll start out first. So basically, we're talking about growth at this point, new decisions being made by potential customers, right? Growth. With the recent changes, we've always operated this way. Growth should pay for growth. And when I look back on the last 20 years of how we've operated, we've always kind of done that. And when I think of growth paying for growth, if we have a customer come in, it's not just putting the gas in front of their location. It's looking at the entire system. Is there an infrastructure need upstream? Is the supply meter need to be changed? Is there something else impacting the system? To me, that is growth. That is part of that request by this potential customer. And they've always paid for that. And that's the reason why it's really easy for us. The $3 million threshold for growth, we've never had it. I've looked back over the last 5 years. I haven't even seen a growth project over $1 million in like that I can even think of, because we've always required growth to pay for growth. And because of that, any of these incentives by cities or challenges or changes that they make, that's not our decision. We truly see that as a decision by the potential customer. They work through their city building codes. They find out what they can and can't do. And if they come to us asking us for service and they're willing to pay for it, and we have the capacity, we're willing to work with them. But we really haven't got into that. We haven't really challenged any of those things. At Crested Butte, for example, the city of Crested Butte has said no more building permits will be allowed for natural gas. That was their decision. That's not ours. If somebody needs gas in Crested Butte South outside of that area, and we have the capacity and they work with all those rules and regulations, we gladly supply them. That's kind of our position.
Okay, then I think, oh, go ahead.
If I can say this. So I mentioned that clean heat supplemental testimony. It walks through each of these factors required under the rule. The one thing I wanted to mention is what Atmos did for that as a starting point before the supplemental testimony was cut historic growth rates in half, right? So instead of just saying, okay, business as usual, we'll continue to grow as we have in the past, they actually cut the base growth rate and then layered on additional adjustments for each of those factors to the extent a factor could reasonably be identified with a specific adjustment to it. For example, the elasticity of demand didn't have any adjustment tied to it because the academic research suggested for something like gas service, it's pretty inelastic once a customer's connected to the system. Replacing that is expensive and time consuming. But I don't know if you want to walk through each of the factors from the clean heat rules, or it'd be more helpful just to refer to Ken Fogel's supplemental testimony in that proceeding, where he does go subsection by subsection explaining how Atmos evaluated each factor and then what adjustments were made to the forecast based on each factor.
Yeah, that probably would be more helpful. I do still have a question, just like trying to wrap my head around this. So you're talking when Mike was asking questions about sort of like your subscription and you're sort of using, you're looking at your or you're making a commitment and it's not a forecast, you're like working with these upstream providers. But then, which makes, so that makes sense. And then, or I think I understand that. And then I think I'm understanding here, like, you're sort of agnostic to the decisions that are happening at these like building code level or sort of like electrification level, and not agnostic, but like you said, you're kind of working through if we can supply it, we'll supply it, or if we'll look into the capacity needs. But what happens, like, how are your subscriptions impacted by that? Like for this Crested Butte example, are you still saying our subscription remains the same, or say the subscription does remain the same, but the actual usage goes down? Like, what's happening in that delta? Like, I think that's what I'm not getting. Like,
Yeah.
is a subscription like a take or pay? Like, I'm just unfamiliar with that. So if you could talk through, like, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the Crested Butte one's a good example, and it was part of the real puzzle in doing the forecast for the clean heat plan, because you really have kind of two different things happening, right? You have building code changes and restrictions on new growth and new load. And so that's just not going to show up. You're not going to plan for that at all, right? And so in the context we're talking about, you will need no additional upstream capacity to the extent you might associate it with growth, because that's not materializing. The other one that's harder is to say, all right, a customer who electrifies. So they're off the system for most of the year, but on the coldest day, when everybody is using their peak amount of gas and Atmos is using their full capacity upstream, you still need it. And so I think that's one of the big things that, and I'm sure you guys have heard this before, that's happening, is really this disconnect between volumes going down and associated emissions going down, and yet the need to still have capacity on this infrastructure for those peak times, particularly when gas is still being viewed as a backup fuel. And so I think that's right, because you're going, okay, new customers, fine, nothing's happening. Existing customers, are they fully electrifying or are they partially electrifying? And then, okay, if they're partially electrifying, annual volumes go down, but peak day requirements probably don't. They just end up using it a few days a year. And then that all informs, you're kind of getting into a gas supply question. What I really encourage you to do is look at Atmos's gas purchase plan, which talks about the procurement of upstream capacity in order to supply the different GCA areas. And that's where, again, these forecasts for clean heat that are then flowing into the gas infrastructure plan are different than gas supply looking at historic loads using proprietary research around 1 in 30 load forecasts or winter events, and then saying, okay, now here's how much capacity we need to contract for 3 or 5 years out, just to ensure that we have adequate supply for that period until we go and reevaluate what the supply looks like.
Sure, but I think,
just
go ahead.
Sure, sorry. What we do is formally every spring is we get with gas supply and we review our gas supply planning design day. We do a formal review. We look at the past winter. We look at the peak days. We looked at the peak HDDs. They look at our supply. We look at our pressures on our system. We collaborate and make sure that our capacity is still where it needs to be. I've never seen it go down. But, going forward, maybe it will in the future. And we do a formal review every year to make sure we're in that range and that everything is adequate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think if you've got I can look into the gas purchase plan, but I think just at a high level, one more question on this, and then I will move on, is, in the intro of all of your 6 sort of service areas, it sounded like capacity really wasn't an issue across those areas. And so when you're making these subscriptions, like, are you subscribing to capacity and throughput, or are you saying, capacity is fine, we're subscribing just to throughput? This is my lack of understanding on how gas works, but that's something I'm wondering about as well.
You're subscribing on a capacity basis to upstream capacity through the FERC jurisdictional rates.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
And then, you get into it too, because the gas purchase plan also gets into the asset management arrangements where Atmos uses a third party to optimize that capacity, essentially to resell it to others when they can utilize it and the company doesn't need it in order to generate value for customers to help offset those costs. So it is more complicated than just making a commitment to an amount of capacity and paying for it. That there's a number of variables that impact what the ultimate cost is.
Okay, and that can all be found in your gas purchase plan. Okay, thank you. All right, so I guess not talking about line extension, price elasticity, demand. You already went through this before. Okay. All right, then I think that kind of wraps up my questions on forecasting or that specific section of the clean heat plan requirements. I was hoping to move into alternatives analyses and understanding, this question was written before you just sort of talked about the state of your system, but still curious, recognizing that you didn't have any new business or capacity expansion that fell above this $3 million. Just still wondering, do you have a process to sort of do a comparative analysis of demand and supply side investments? And do you conduct such analyses, just in general business operations?
Right, you're talking about some sort of non-pipeline alternative. Is that what you're referring to, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we again, we leave that to the potential customer to work with the local, that they can get with the local electric company. They can do whatever they want. If they make their decision, we don't get into their business. And then if they come to us and ask for a proposal of what we can provide, that's what we provide. And then we want to give them the information that helps them determine what's in their best interest. And we don't offer incentives. We're very transparent. We give them the exact cost. We'll do a design. We'll get a true proposal from a contractor, and that's the extent that we go.
And I think the conversation around alternatives, right? The rules clearly carved off where they're required, where they're not. I understand for purposes of this conversation, just more conceptually, there's issues like unprotected bare steel, where the federal regulators are telling the company you need to replace this. And that's not something that can be done with a demand side solution, right? And then the other reality of it is where those projects are occurring, it's not like a long stretch of Maine serving a cul-de-sac of customers, and there's only a handful of them on the other side of a $3 million investment. I think in that situation, Atmos would look at it and say, does this make business sense, or should these customers be converted to a different fuel source, whatever they choose it to be? But I think the rules had a logic to it in terms of at least tracking that there are some projects for which an alternative doesn't make sense, because the alternative is you have to essentially terminate service to everybody served by that section of the system. And I think if you look at the details of the specific projects, these are all kind of embedded in the middle of towns and in the middle of communities where you can't really just say, okay, we're not going to make that and we're going to shut off everybody who's connected to it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And reviewing those project maps, for the 10 projects you submitted, I definitely was seeing that you're like in the middle of a neighborhood, or but I think so to your question of like, you leave that to the potential customer, what happens? Again, I want to just go back to this Crested Butte example, and I think it's a good one for me to picture. Not only does Crested Butte say change their building codes, restrictions on new gas, they also introduce some like very competitive electrification subsidization, right? That like makes it cost competitive with the gas system. I'm not sure this is happening, but I'm just kind of painting this as like, we can even call it town A. Kind of what happens then is the town coming to you when they're talking about like a franchise agreement and saying, hey, we need less? Or like, are you guys looking at that? Because I think when I'm understanding how you're talking about like a potential customer, like a large customer that may need more, but what about like the aggregation of residential customers? How are you guys treating that?
I mean, from a franchise perspective, right, what those do is give the right to serve all customers who want gas in the community and assesses a fee based on the amount of customers served and the amount of volumes provided. So, I mean, ultimately, it's a percentage on the bill. That conversation I haven't heard about happening. I think the real question is, you know, what we're all waiting to see in Colorado is these policies are clear, but what does the customer response look like? And I think that was really detailed in one of the attachments to UCA's comments or CEO's comments, sorry, that right, ultimately this is getting to an individual decision-making standpoint. And so then kind of following that hypothetical, in the future, Atmos may get to a point where they're saying, wow, in Crested Butte, there really is little to no demand anymore. What are we going to do? But that's not the world we're in today. The world we're in today is customers who are on the system still want gas. And, you know, new customers are dealing with the fact, or new builds are dealing with the fact they can't get it in that locality. They can't get gas service even if they wanted it. But at least everything I've seen, we haven't seen this kind of material drop in demand anywhere yet. And I think that's what, you know, Mr. Dixon raised from the clean heat plan. The real challenge there is the systems do continue to grow in Colorado with an emission target based on 2015 that from year one, all the utilities have said, this is pretty much unachievable just because customers, the actual residents of Colorado, continue to demand gas service. John, do you have anything to add to that one, or?
No, well stated.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'm gonna just jump around a little bit. I'm trying to get all the questions outside of the specific projects kind of out of the way first. So we're going to move over to the annual leak survey that is in the clean heat or the GIP on page, I think it's page 21. Just like my understanding, again, looks like there's like about 3,200 miles of mains across the state, and it's looking like you're doing about 40% of those mains each year. Those are new mains, so is that saying every 2.5 years you're inspecting all your mains, or how does that, like, what does the cycle of inspection look like?
Right, and a lot of the code is only like every 5 years, but we accelerate that. We're doing it much quicker. And you got to understand it's a combination. We also have like building districts, a downtown area, and we survey that every year. Well, that mileage is embedded in it. And then we have other areas that we only survey maybe every 2 or 3 years. And so at the end of the day, you're going to see us basically every 3 years surveying more pipe than we have, because business districts are done every year, and that's embedded in that.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Mike, any other questions on these? Otherwise, I have some questions on the SSIR project prioritization, which I know is confidential. So go ahead and hold off on that. And then project specific questions, which I don't think should be confidential. But yeah, I've seen, yep, Leslie, I've seen you have some questions.
Hi, just a quick question. I am looking at what you have on the screen for leak surveying and annual leak survey. Could you tell me a little bit more about, and this is something that we have had a good description in other gas infrastructure plans and clean heat plans with regards to AMLD, the capacity of the equipment that you currently have for leak detection when it comes to like a perimeter or distance from where your surveyors either go if it's done through mobile equipment, or walk if it's a walking type of survey that you're doing. What is the capacity as far as leak detection, as far as distance from where the surveying either person or equipment is standing?
Right, we survey directly over our lines. The only one that would cover the broad area is the AMLDs.
Mhm.
And if you notice, there's 4 different methods that we're using: the AMLD, the VMD, the PMD. And those are really based off of, a lot of it is the geographic area and how can we survey it. We have some, so like the vehicle mounted, let's talk about actually the ATVs. The VMDs are usually mounted to like a 4-wheeler, an ATV, because the type of terrain to do that survey is off-road. And so you really can't do any of the other methods. And so we use that, and that's the method we would use. There are some areas where we have easy access to it and we can walk over it. And there are some that we have the vehicle mounted, the VMDs, where we're driving down the road, and it's, it wouldn't be safe for our employees to be walking down a curb on a highway. And so you have a vehicle mounted style. So we use all of the different methods depending on the application. And that's the reason why you see a blend of all of them. But we survey directly over our lines.
Within your service territory, there are identified some DEI communities. Is there in your programming for leak detection any priority for those territories, or is just all distributed according to just a general program?
Right. It's based off of basically the PHMSA guidelines of that code, which does not consider we're focused on the pipeline, and we treat every pipeline the same with the same safety. And we have not ever taken that into consideration of, who's next to the line. There are some areas though that we do survey more frequently and have more visits. And those are typically your trailer parks. And the reason for that is they can be mobile, with a home on concrete, it's not going to move. But with a trailer park, they can move a trailer and then they might move it and put it over one of our lines or create an issue that we need to be aware of. So as far as that segment, which might be a DI community, we do those more frequently, but it's really based off the pipe and the structure as opposed to the individual living in that home.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I think so the next section I put questions on is this SSI rider project prioritization. I just want to note both it's all marked confidential. So just want to confirm pretty much anything related to that should be in the confidential section. I have some questions both on like how the results came up and like what you mean by certain line items. Should we hold on to that?
Yeah, that's appropriate for the confidential session. It looks like Mr. Dixon's joined us here.
Yes.
On camera. He's been here, but joined us on camera. Tom?
Yeah, just before we go into the confidential section, I want to talk about some public issues on coils. And so I know there's information in the confidential stuff. I don't intend to go into that, but at some point I just have some comments that relate to the public part of your report. So whenever that's convenient, I'll be happy to bring that up.
Why don't we go ahead and have that question now? I didn't have many questions on the coils and was going to go into the project specific questions. So yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, good. Thank you. Very simply, as I understand, Atmos does not replace customer-owned yard lines for its customers at the company's expense. Am I correct in that assumption?
The company replaces coils when they're connected to something like an SSIR main replacement and they're identified. Atmos does not install coils to establish gas service to a property. So it's really distinguishing between a new installation for a brand new customer and the replacement of a coil should it be attached to something like main being replaced under the SSIR. John, is that accurate?
Sure. I mean, we even covered this in the last rate case. The only time we would replace a coil at the company's expense if it's safety related and it's something we need to do. So as Nick just said, like a project, if the old main is in an alley and the meter is right there and there's a coil, yet the project design is moving the main to the street, we are now ignoring that coil and we're going to run a service up to where it enters the building, because that's how the design works out, and that makes sense. We're not going to run a service all the way across a property to an alley to tie into an existing meter. We're not going to do that. So the only time we do it is if it really is fundamentally makes sense. If we put the line back in the alley, we're not going to replace the coil because that small service line stays right where it is. That meter stays right where it is. The only time we would do it again is if there's a safety issue and we feel that we need to do that to protect our assets.
That's helpful. One question, when you do essentially replace a coil, and I assume you install a company-owned service line to the facility, then the house or whatever, I assume that cost then is socialized among all customers, not charged to the individual that is receiving the new service line?
So what we've done in the past is, we present our SSIR proposed projects, and if you look through this, you'll see how many coils are in each project. That's in every plan we do. We provide it. It's reviewed by all parties interested that have a say in our SSIR before we ever do it. And we do some coils as part of the plan, and that's built into the project, and we've never had it questioned of, no, do not do that, because we're only doing it when we need to, but it is part of the total project cost.
Okay, so again, that would be paid by all ratepayers, assessed against all ratepayers, those costs.
Okay, sure.
Including the coils. I don't want to get into the numbers. That's why I'm staying away from
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into that. That's all in your confidential material. I don't need to get into that at all. I just wanted to understand conceptually how you handle coils, which when you, as your report says on page 19, you address it where a safety or possible compliance situation occurs. That's the top of the page. You'll relocate the meter as you deem necessary. I assume that's what you just described.
That is correct.
Okay, that's all I need, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I think the important thing to keep in mind there is customers with coils have also paid embedded cost rates that reflect the coils of the company or the service lines that the company paid for all the other customers. And so you've got this question around, okay, they've essentially been subsidizing other customers' service lines. And now the company's adding a service line to the common costs to replace that coil, but that's different than establishing gas service for the first time with a service line.
On coils, do you ever have a situation where a customer does not want to replace a problematic coil? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, sadly. So if a leak is found on their coil downstream of the meter on their line, if there's a leak, we shut them in, and we will not turn it back on until that repair is made. They're off. And if they don't repair it and they don't pass a pressure test, we don't turn them back on. And that was their decision. It doesn't happen very often, but yes, it could happen. We would not turn them back on with an unsafe line.
Is there any sort of financing program or anything like that to help a customer with pay for the coil replacement?
No, we don't have anything like that at all.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tom and Mike. Okay, so moving on to project questions. Just a quick sort of housekeeping question. I'm in attachment E public. So anything I'm asking is hopefully public, and the answer is confidential. We'll move it over there. But so on page 6B, associated annual revenue requirement, you see attachment 1 for calculation of the annual revenue requirements. Can you help me find attachment 1? I actually couldn't find that in your submissions.
Yeah, it's keep scrolling here, Christine. there, stop. So there's two different scenarios. These are the revenue requirements that, see, it's attachment 1, but it's confusing because
okay.
it's embedded for each project. And you've got the two different scenarios, one at normal depreciation rates and one at accelerated depreciation.
Understood. Okay, that is helpful. Okay, so I'm not actually seeing it in this table on a quick glance. Could you share if the company uses a net salvage value for these assets, and if so, what that value is?
I believe are you talking about cost of removal? We
Yes.
plug in about 5% is typically what that is.
Just 5%?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Then there's a couple places I can find the page number if it would be helpful, but I think it's like repeated throughout the 10 projects where you say the useful life for services, and wait, let me just make sure that I'm.
Yeah, so I think I know where you're headed. So in the company's last rate case, Atmos had a depreciation study prepared that actually recommended that service lives be extended. And so in that case, the company did not extend service lines, essentially accelerating the depreciation of service lines. So it was an interesting thing where the expert, based on their analysis, said these lives should be longer and depreciation expense for them should be lower. And instead, the company retained the existing lives for those services in order to depreciate them faster.
Is that something you could explain, like the why behind, or would that be something we should go track in that proceeding?
Which why? Why did the depreciation experts say they should be longer, or why did we end up leaving them at their existing life?
Maybe both. This is just new to me. I think I was just kind of reading, like, the rate making purpose is 41 years, but 53 is the useful life, and there's a 75-year useful life of the mains. I kind of was just like, what's going on? This is just new to me, and was hoping for some more like conversation narrative around it, just so that I could read that and like explain it to someone else.
I'm no depreciation expert, so I'll give my high level understanding, and based on Kat's face, I don't think she's a depreciation expert either. But so in utility depreciation, usually you have an expert who looks at the historical investments in removal of certain asset types. So like we're talking about here, services as distinguished from main, as distinguished from meters, right? So you kind of determine a category of asset, and you look at historically how long have these lasted based on the historic replacement and removal costs, right? And so then using statistics, they figure out, okay, these assets have a life of a certain amount of time. And so that just entirely based on the data, that's where the expert said in the last case it was services, and I think one or two other accounts, these actually should be extended further than how they're currently reflected in rates. And so in recognition of Colorado state policy and the state's decarbonization goals, the decision was made not to push for those longer lives. And so, one of the issues that's teed up in clean heat plans and for discussion in these gas infrastructure plans is depreciation, and should changes be made. And so that's, I think, an important one to call out, is that there actually is this implied accelerated depreciation occurring on the Atmos system for services. And I could point you to the expert testimony in that case. I don't know if it'll help clarify it any more than what I just said, though. So.
If you have that on hand, that would be something that would be helpful. But your explanation was already helpful, so thank you for that. But if you do have that expert testimony,
it's 22AL0348G, and I believe we only had direct testimony from Mr. Watson, Dane Watson.
Great. Thanks. I will give that a read and see how much of a headache I get. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So then let's see. Got attachment 1. Figured that out. Oh, okay. This is another, just sort of kind of came up a few times, so was interested in what this sort of meant in practice for you all. Under C, the page 4, the PHMSA code requirements, the second bullet says Pipes Act, contains a self-executing requirement for operators to, replace or remediate all pipelines that are known to leak. Do you have like an average known leakage as a percent on the system, or is that sort of just pointing us towards, this is a thing that exists that you're looking towards?
So if you're looking for leakage information, that would, I believe that's in, yeah, attachment D. That section there, if you go to the second to the last page, this is what we file every year. And go up a little bit more, right there. So that this is all the leak information that's happened in the state. This is a state report that we provide. And I'm not sure if this answered your question, but I wanted to put the data in front of you.
John, on that known to leak aspect of the Pipes Act and PHMSA's requirements, I mean, then doesn't that flow to pipes of certain materials that are known to be leak prone that get kind of subsumed within that category? So you've kind of got known leaks, identified leaks, and you have to repair those. And then you've also got kind of pipes that are expected to leak at some point because of the nature of the material. And PHMSA is focused on replacing the pipes of those material as well, right?
Right. PHMSA is really looking at what material are leaks occurring on. Are they bare steel? Are they unprotected, protected? Are they on aldelay plastic pipe prior to 1983? And they're wanting plans built on material base. They call them obsolete materials.
Yes. All right. So I'm looking at what you're looking at. Is there a way for me to map this? Like if you just take sort of this top line, corrosion failure, seeing 89 mains, 44 of which are hazardous. And then, services will just go across, 52 and 15. Would there be a way for me, like, I know that you guys reported your miles of mains. Is there a way for me to get a sense of like, what does this mean in respect to your whole system? Like, are we at 89 of like 10,000? Or I think just absent a main diagram of the system, it's a little bit hard for me to like attach these numbers to something and be like, oh yes, okay, I understand sort of what this table is telling me.
Are you talking about like a leaks per mile type data point, or?
I guess, yeah. Like I know, I've seen like some system averages are like, we expect 2% leak on our system, or, just sort of wondering if there's a way for me to understand that or kind of go looking down that. But this is a really helpful table that I think, didn't click in my head the first time I looked through it. So I appreciate you pointing me to this.
One of the other pieces that was included here, I think it was attachment I, the emissions impact calculation. And so that actually does it by, okay, if you take some of these leak prone materials and then replace them with modern materials, it kind of has an assumption around leaks per foot, essentially. And maybe that's kind of a way to start thinking about it. So that's how you say, okay, if we replace this much bare steel with this much modern pipe, we can assume based on the EPA's methodology that it results in this much savings.
Sure.
Okay, but there's not like, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you go to attachment E, section 10, it shows the impact of emissions by removing the materials. Attachment E, section 10. So
for each project?
Yeah, for each project.
But I hear what you're asking is a bit different, Jesse, in terms of saying, okay, how do I take like this data from the PHMSA report and get a sense of magnitude across the whole system, recognizing for Atmos, the whole system is really these 6 geographic areas.
So you can go to the page, the second page in that report, the DOT report, that has the description in miles per material type that we
Second
have
page
in
of attachment D, Christine. But does it? So that's just, Juan, you're saying that just shows what the different miles of main or services by material type are?
Yeah, I feel like what she wanted to get to, it's how many leaks per mile. It's what
Yeah,
you
so you
will
can,
get out of the total leaks you have in the next page, and here you have the total mileage of the system.
so
And
that
here's the
gives you the
picture
data.
size by size, if we can go that granular.
Yeah, I think that looking at, like, there's probably a way for me to extrapolate, you know, if I'm seeing, if I could back calculate, which, you know, sure is doable, the delta in emissions, attach that somehow to your number of leaks and spread that over your number of miles of mains. There's probably like some pretty sketchy math I could do there, but was just sort of wondering, like, do you have a sense of magnitude, like you had said, Nick, of, and it's okay if no, I'm just asking and trying to understand, of like, we're assuming a 2.5% leak across the system. We're assuming a 1.5% leak. But if not, like, we don't need to go down this path too far.
No, we don't have that.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just if I could follow up, are you tracking leaks per material and age of main and service?
We're getting better at it. What you'll see though is all the projects that are included in this, there is the leakage for those particular projects. And that is one of the components that's built into the prioritization, is leaks on those materials.
Okay. And then, how bad does a leak have to be for you to repair it versus replace it?
Right. So below ground leaks, we've gotten to the point where we're getting rid of all of them like within a year, no matter what it is, any below ground leak. What you're really getting into is our operations, where if there's a grade 1 leak, we do not leave the site until it's repaired. It doesn't matter if it's Friday at 11 o'clock, we'll work all night, we will not leave it. And there's criteria about grading the leaks that dictate when they need to be repaired. If it's a grade 2 or 3, then it doesn't have to be repaired that day. But our intent is we don't have leaks that are, I want to say any leak that was found in 2023 is already repaired.
Okay.
Do you really like in a leak repair context, do you really distinguish between repair and replacement as compared to like SSIR? We know we're going to replace these specific materials for a specific project.
Right. Thanks for clarifying that, Nick. When we say repair, it's a permanent repair. We don't do anything temporary. And so there's different things that require you to go further back. If you dig up a pipeline and it was nicked by somebody in previous years and created a small corrosion point, and you can just cut out like 5 feet of main and the rest of the pipe is good, that's the permanent repair. If you dig it up and it was a bad fitting and you can cut the fitting out and replace it, you do. Some of the times you'll dig it up and you'll evaluate that you got to go back maybe a block. But really, once you expose a leak, that's going to drive the amount of repair required. But we don't just find a leak on a street and say, okay, we're replacing the subdivision tomorrow. We don't do that. We focus on the leak. We focus on what is the correct permanent repair for that section of pipe.
Okay, appreciate that. And um, I guess it's hard to understand, um, how far away from the leak would you be replacing the pipe? If if you knew this was 70-year-old pipe or something of that nature, or pre-1970s, um, would you just replace, you know, a 6-foot section, or how big of a project would it entail at that point in time?
Probably it's both. I mean, it's really difficult to determine. Let's say you're on Main Street in a town, and on this block, you look at in the last 10 years, you've dug up and replaced 4 or 5 feet of that multiple times in different areas. At one point, you look at that and say, wow, let's build a project, let's go through the process, let's go out for bid, and let's replace the section that needs to be replaced. If you dig up a piece of pipe and you've never had a leak on it, and again, you see an isolated cause, you just do the permanent repair as needed. But it can be both, and a lot of it has to do with the trending that you see from previous leaks or the condition of the pipe when you expose it. So it can turn into a project, and it cannot turn into a project. It really just depends on the trending of other leaks in the area, the condition of the material that you find when you dig it up.
And my understanding, I mean, that's a big reason why the SSIR was developed and approved. So you avoid a situation of saying, wow, we just keep repairing this pipe that we know is made out of a leak-prone material. Let's actually be thoughtful about it and develop a project, assess the overall risk, and just replace that segment of this material that we know is leak-prone. So we're not just back out here playing whack-a-mole with leaks over time.
Right. And as far as your mapping goes, do you know specifically where your bare steel is, or is it kind of an estimate of the length of pipe of bare steel left, or how accurate is your mapping and specific to aging pipe and aging material?
Okay, great. I'm so glad you brought it up because we're at a very, very good spot with our GIS system. Several years ago, as we were going through, okay, just back up if you don't mind. Several years ago, through the SSIR, because our maps didn't have everything documented, it was agreed that we could do basically a GIS and then a field verification of our system to really know it, to get our GIS system accurate, so we're doing what we should be doing and not doing what we shouldn't be doing. So several years ago, we went to every office and found every piece of paper that had anything to do with mapping pipe below ground systems. Scanned it, got it into a system. We spent the last 2 years having contractors go in and adding it to our GIS system. We got all that done. And then starting in January, we started looking at the areas where you just didn't have any information on the pipe. And we're doing a field verification. We literally go out, we use a back truck, we pothole down, we actually expose the pipe and find out what it is and find out what size it is. And we're adding that to the maps and we're basically there. We have now confirmed that bare steel is a little over 100 miles. And so the next DOT report, it's going to be well under 100 miles because we have some projects going on right now. By the end of this year, we'll be able to confidently say all the material and where it's located in our system. It'll be mapped on our GIS system. So we're really excited about where we are today.
And John, with the information provided in this attachment D around miles based on vintage and material, so then this is just best estimates based on what the company knows when the report's filed. And so those evolve over time as, like, for example, GIS has been updated.
And again, that's a 2022 report that we're reviewing, and we'll be filing 2024 this spring, and it will be very accurate.
And as far as age, um, are you, how accurately are you able to incorporate age of the materials into your GIS system?
You know, we, again, the work orders, if we had a work order and it said it was installed in, 1968 on March 7th, that goes into the GIS record. So the date is actually an attribute on that section of pipe. There are locations where we don't know the age of the material, and that's one of the things where we're going to start going through. Once we do the field verification of what it is, that's one of our next steps where we will start looking at plats. Like if we find a subdivision in Craig, Colorado, and it was installed in 1974, and we don't know the age of the material, then we're going to start applying, well, when they built that house and asked for gas service, that's as good as we can do. So we're going to start doing some logic like that to make sure that we have age on all our system.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. I have two follow-ups, one on the leaks and one on the GIS. I'll start with the leaks. You had said, the grade 1 leak, you don't leave the site, and there's a criteria. How many grades are there, and is it your criteria? Is it a federal criteria? Not as familiar with that.
That can get very complex very quickly. We have 3 grades, 1, 2, and 3, and it has to do with the amount of methane that they measure from the leak survey equipment. The location, is it in the middle of a field away from, it's non-hazardous, it's in the middle of a field and it's very small. That would be something like a grade 3. If it's next to a house, it's going to be like a grade 1. But there's a lot of criteria that's built in that our employees are trained on, and it's all in our operations and maintenance manual on how we do our leak surveys.
John, is that all based on PHMSA regulation?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so is that PHMSA regulation, to my understanding, means your company and another gas company in Ohio are using the same grading system?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, so is yours in-house, or is it like, that's what I'm trying to understand, like how? Yeah.
It's in-house. It's been reviewed by the safety part of the PUC. They can review it every year when they do audits. They literally will be out in the field and say, hey, I want to see a leak record, and they'll look at we have drawings on each leak found of where we surveyed it and do all our work and the methodology we use, and it's reviewed during our safety audits by the PUC in the field.
Okay, and so that makes sense. Then maybe, my follow-up question with that is, are your grades consistent across the states you're operating in, or could you have like a more stringent grade 2 because the safety part of the PUC in one state had more, are you kind of levelizing that way, or is it like, could it be different state to state as well?
We operate in 8 states. We have one O&M manual. We have one construction procedures. However, a state might have a state specific on any topic. And so that state might have to do something in addition to what we do. But yes, we all use the same grading system. We have one training facility where all our technicians go to the same facility, have the same training. And so we'll have somebody from Greeley, Colorado, and they'll be in a class from somebody from Jackson, Mississippi. But they're all being trained exactly the same way on everything.
Cool. Okay. Thanks. That's helpful. So my next follow-up is on the GIS system. You had said, if you've got a work order, you're able to put that year in, but if not, you're kind of looking to the clues of, this is a subdivision, et cetera. What percentage do you have work orders for of your system versus how much do you think you'll be kind of using the logic to understand your pipe age?
I wish I can get that. I can get that information for you. I don't have it in front of me. If you bear with me, I'll try to look on my computer real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
But if it's,
I got
if
it.
it's a hassle.
I
Okay,
got
great.
it. So In Colorado, we have 0.23% of unknown sites, and that's what we're actually finding right now. And we have 37% of incomplete year installed. And that's documented. We don't speculate. If we don't have a record for it, if we can't show you why it is a certain number, then we haven't added it. Because we wanted to go through all our records, and now we're at the point that we can now start adding logic to it and do supporting documentation of why it would be, the year it is.
Great. All right, that's helpful. All right, so moving last sort of broad question, and then I'll get into the specific project questions. So this is for all of the projects. I was kind of looking through the number of miles or feet removed and feet replaced, and there isn't any instances where that's the same number. You've got a delta ranging from about 187 feet down in Durango up to 1,200 feet for your Holly Bear, or no, 1,600 feet for the Granada project. Could you just explain sort of what that delta is attributed to? And it might be just the way that pipes are laid, but that was just sort of a question I had of like, why isn't it really a 1-for-1? And I recognize it's a really small percentage of the project, but just was curious.
Sure. I mean, Juan is our engineering manager, and he owns SSIR, and he works every year with operations, and they review the projects, and he makes sure the boundaries include the. Juan, would you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I understand the question is about how we define the areas, pretty much. So this is an exercise that we do every year with the operations group. They are the subject matter experts in the operation of the system that we have. So we go to them and have a meeting where we sit down, look at the maps. And when this process, the program started, you can tell from the conversation we just have, there was a lot of unknowns. We didn't know exactly where to start. The maps weren't updated. That was one of the bigger questions that we have. So we have to start there. What do you know about the system? What can you tell us about the system? And that way, the program started setting up areas where we believe the pipe that we have identified as critical and that needed replacement, we will find it in that area. So it was kind of a subjective matter, thinking this area, based upon what we are listening from the operations group, could encompass a certain amount of pipe. And then other considerations were given to the areas that were selected. How easy it is to work in this area versus other area? Could we make this a bigger area or a smaller area? Do we know we have much or less pipe to be replaced? And that's why you see a big spectrum of sizes and areas that have been identified as projects, because the geographic, the traffic control, the city where you're working on could allow for a more spread project or a smaller project. That's how the projects were created at that point. With time, we have found that at some point the projects are too big for us to work in a calendar year. That's the program constraint, that we need to finish that in a calendar year. So we have had to cut in phases and work smaller areas. That's something that also has happened. But I don't know if that addresses the question you have.
Yeah, I think it does for the most part. Yeah, that does answer it. So thank you for that. All right, getting into the specific project questions, I'm just going to go project by project. So I don't have any for the project number 1, the Alley Acres Bare Steel. Project 2 for the Atmos View Drive replacement. So it states that the facility is located in a class 3 location. Could you tell, well, again, same kind of questions as the grades. How many classes are there? How are those determined?
John or Juan, which one are you saying? Are you
Yeah,
talking, looking at page 12 of the attachment E? Is that right?
Let me double check on that there.
let's make sure we're all looking at the same. And Juan, if you don't mind, you should be able to be the best person for this.
It comes up a number of times, like, so it's not unique to this project, so I was hoping to just ask it once, but I'm seeing, there's one on page 21 where it says, we're in the Springfield, Colorado, the East Bare Steel. That's page 21 that I'm seeing it at. Sorry, I'm trying to figure that. Yeah, West Bear, Hillside Bear is also class 3, and that's page 39. On page 48 is another one. Page 57 is another one. Page 66, 75, and 84 are just all the type of facility. So yeah, just numerous times, whichever one you want to pull us to, that works.
Can't tell. Juan, are you answering this one?
Is there a specific page you want me on?
What specifically would you like to know about the project?
Like the reference to, we're looking at the Atmos View Drive bare steel replacement, and it refers to a class 3 location.
Yeah, sorry. So why don't we go to page 12? I won't ask the same questions every project, but let's go to page 12. And if you look, just this project introduction, yep, right where you're highlighted, located in class 3 per 192.5. Just, yeah, that wasn't familiar to me.
And so is that using the way you grade leaks, but for a project that is not tied to a leak? Is that the concept here?
Yeah, so a class location is 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's federally defined. 192 is out of the PHMSA code, part 192. And class 3 means it's basically a well-populated area like a subdivision. When you get into class 4, that's going to be like downtown Denver where I am, a high-rise building where you have a huge concentration. And so typically residential areas will be a class 3. And what the class does, it drives a lot of other things like how often do you do a leak survey? And so there's other codes that are kind of layered onto what class location you're in.
And so the idea being the higher the class, the riskier it would be if there was a leak there.
Right. The proximity to the general public there's more density. Did that answer the class 3 location question?
Yes, that does answer it. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Then on page 13, let's see here. Under B, explanation of need, you state that you've identified this as high risk, going to address multiple threats. I'm guessing again this is a PHMSA. This is referencing a PHMSA part, including but not limited to the threat of corrosion. Would you just give us the list of what it is, like what is the whole set of things it's addressing?
That's going to be when we get into the prioritization model. There's 21 different factors that are built into doing this priority, and that I think we could cover that there. You're asking about corrosion and what other things are impacting it, right?
Yes. Yeah. and is that confidential, like the suite of issues that is causing threats here?
So there's a list of identified threats or potential threats in that Part 192 that's cited there, Title 49, Part 192.1007. And so that, in a non-confidential way, lists the different threats that can apply depending on the type of facility we're talking about.
Right, and I'm just trying to understand, there's a number of, so it's one, I think, maybe 6 of your projects I'm seeing, or 5 of them, I'm seeing the same kind of language of like including but not limited to the threat of corrosion. And I'm just trying to understand what are all the threats that you've identified? And I'm like, of these 21, you know, does one project have 18 threats? One project has 3 threats, but those 3 threats are pretty major. I just kind of want to get a sense of like what, you know, just including but not limited to corrosion made me think, well, what is it? What else is going on? So if that's corrosion, or if that's confidential, we can talk about it later. But yeah, just the way that the sentence was worded, I was just curious about what other threats do we have here?
And that is specifically, we treat that on the prioritization model. That's the attachment C, the confidential attachment C, where we are listing the 21 factors that you mentioned. And on this exercise that I mentioned, we met with the operations group. We go over that list, and based upon their knowledge, the records that we have, the GIS system information that we have, the mapping system that we have, we assign these risk or ranks to each of these components. That's how we come out with a rank at the end. So when we get to that confidential model, we can talk more about each specific.
Okay. So I guess I just want to, we can talk about this, but I think I'm looking at confidential attachment C, and I don't see, yeah, let's move this to confidential, but I guess I just want to point out at this point that I don't see like the raw data for any of these projects. I see sort of a blank SSIR.
Yeah, there's the
aggregate
project prioritization scores were provided, but not
right. But that
specific
still doesn't
model. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like it still doesn't give me the, oh, conversationally I can talk about, or I can think through, you know, the Animus view has these threats and the hillside has these other threats. All I know is it has at least corrosion, right? Like neither the score nor the SSIR input that you provided, I don't think has how these projects scored within these threats, right? Like I can read the threats, I can read the score, but I can't figure out, I don't think, with the data that you guys have presented, what the threats are. But when we go into the confidential session, we can pull this all up and see if I missed something.
And as I read that, it's referring to that specific part, which has corrosion, including atmospheric corrosion, natural forces, excavation damage, other outside force damage, material or welds, equipment failure, incorrect operations, and other issues that could threaten the integrity of its pipeline. So it's a pretty expansive one, right? So we're talking about bare steel, you've got corrosion and threats associated with the material, right? So you kind of got some overlap there.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think for now, I don't want to like accidentally go into something that is confidential. So we'll just wait for that session for me to finish these questions. Okay, so I had the same question for bare steel, which we're going to hold on. Didn't have any questions for Springfield West. I had the same questions for Hillside, so we'll hold on that. No questions for Northeast River. No questions for the 23rd Ave. I had a couple of questions. Well, I'll hold these till the end. Any questions? Okay, so yeah, pretty much all my questions were what are the actual threats facing these projects for those projects that this sentence is used. which is, to recap, the Granada project, the John Evans 11th project, the Holly Bear project, the Hillside project, the Springfield East, and the Animas View project. So we'll hold all of those. The only other set of questions I had, which I think we got to in the beginning, this is project specific, because you guys sort of explained how you go through like the, forecasting versus looking at actual customer data use. There are a number of these projects that have electric service providers that are either submitting clean heat plans or have their own individual incentives. And I think you already answered it, but if you guys wanted to say anything else about, how you're looking at those utility programs, I can go through the specifics, but I think you guys sort of already covered it, that you're not looking into that yet. You're looking into history and kind of how these policies will go, but until you sort of see customer changes, there's not much you're needing to do there. Is there anything else you wanted to say about any of the electric utilities in the service territory, whether you're looking into their electrification programs?
On electrification programs broadly, right? I mean, I think the Atmos view is electrification is something that could happen to Atmos based on what customers in these service territories decide to do. That whether or not individual customers make that decision obviously can be influenced by the electric provider and what sort of incentives they're offering. But I think the other hard thing from a gas utility infrastructure planning standpoint is, other than like entirely new electric developments, which obviously aren't going to be served by gas anyway, like we covered earlier, how do you deal with gas infrastructure when it's on a house by house on any given block and just customer by customer within a networked service area, to start really trying to address that, other than just tracking usage over time and having that inform future investment decisions, right? And so I think that's what Atmos has confronted, is a lot of speculation about what the future might look like, while also dealing with the reality of customers continuing to pursue gas service and to want gas service. And so I think that going through and identifying the electric suppliers, and they all have their various programs they're offering in addition to what CEO or other providers or parties in the state might be providing in terms of incentives or funding. But from a, do you go replace this bare steel in Alley's Acres, you can't really tie that back to customer decisions around electrification, because they will be so individualized right now.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, Mike, do you have any questions on any of the project specifics?
No, thanks.
Okay, good. Anyone from the UCA have project specific questions?
Yeah, I have a generic question. This is Tom Dixon again, speaking for the UCA. In your report we're looking at right here, you have under section D, the initial paragraph begins saying the goal is to substitute piping with similar size and location, although adjustments to the location may occur during the design phase, potentially affecting the system's footage. I take that to mean that there is no capacity expansion, because in these pipeline safety projects that you've identified in this confidential document. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's no expansion. You got to remember, these are usually the oldest system in a community, which is usually the heart of the community. And, there's been growth around it already. These aren't just like new subdivisions that are by themselves. And the footage might be more, it might be less. We'd like for it to be less. We want a more efficient system. Just depends on where you place it. Again, we talk about alley versus street, if there's something that makes sense. The size, if it's a 2-inch main, we're going back with 2-inch. If it's a 4-inch main, we go back with 4. So Tom, we try to stick to that. Yes.
Yeah, that was what I took this to mean, and I just wanted to clarify it. What I wanted to make sure is also, when you say may be adjustments during the design phase. You're talking not about expanding the capacity, but the adjustments in footage and things you just described. Am I correct, John?
That is correct.
Okay, that's very helpful, and thank you. That's all I have with respect to this. And I won't probably have any questions on the confidential part. I'm not planning on getting into those.
All right, thanks for letting
And
us
I have
know.
one procedural question, if I may. Are we going to go directly to confidential, or do you plan on taking a break for lunch or anything of that nature? And again, I'm just asking, not requesting one way or another.
No, I think we'll take a break for lunch from 12 to 1, so coming up pretty quickly on that, and then we can go into the confidential section.
Thank you.
Can I ask a
I
question
do have,
really quick to follow up on what
yeah,
Mr.
absolutely.
Dixon was just asking about? John, do you ever encounter like size of pipe that isn't used anymore?
Right. So you might find an oddball size like 4 1/4 inch. Well, you can't replace it with 4 1/4. You don't have fittings, it doesn't fit. It would go to a 4-inch. If you find a 3-inch main, then you go to the next nominal size that's in our system. It's 2, 4, 6, and 8. So if you find a 3-inch pipe, you would automatically put in a 4-inch.
But that's not because of capacity. That's just
No, that's just because you can't get 3-inch pipe. You
Okay.
can't get fittings for it. They don't exist.
I have 7/8 inch pipe in my sprinkler at home, and it turns out they don't sell fittings for that. It's a real nightmare.
Great, that's helpful to know. Okay, I have a couple of questions sort of just about, yeah, I'm gonna finish up these in the next few minutes and we'll go to lunch. The first is, you already kind of explained why the base, low, and high forecasts are confidential. Can you explain why the 1 and extreme cold weather conditions are confidential?
That's that proprietary third-party report that was provided.
Yes.
And I think that's the nature of it, is it's a third party's work
Okay.
product that Atmos pays for, and so maintains confidentiality of it.
Okay. And then what about the rationale for making the planned project location maps in attachment E confidential? Because in attachment B, we can sort of see the map with the intersection of disproportionately impacted communities, and that's non-confidential. I'm just sort of wondering why the whole project became confidential, even though you can sort of see the projects in that attachment B.
I mean, the one-line diagrams for all the projects have consistently been confidential through the SSIR, so it's a continuation of that. One of the primary concerns that I've heard from the company is parties potentially utilizing these public maps instead of calling before they dig and getting actual locates for any underground facilities. So they might look at a map and feel like they have a sense of where something is, but that's not exactly where it is. And so they skip that location step, and then we've got a leak to deal with. I think the other piece that comes up around gas utility infrastructure pretty consistently is just concerns around bad actors. And so we were very intentional in what was provided as a public map, and as we got more and more granular into the specific projects, then drawing that line when the actual infrastructure was being shown for those reasons. And it's both kind of a public safety from somebody just trying to shortcut what they're supposed to do before they dig, to a bigger picture concern of someone actually targeting gas utility infrastructure in the state. John, do you have anything to add to that?
No, well said. I mean, you got to remember, we are accountable to you, but we're also accountable to TSA, Homeland Security, NTSB, and they don't want to share anything. And so it's a balance of, how much of your system can you share because of the bad actors that are out there, and that's the reason we want to show it to you, but it would be confidential.
That's understood. Okay. Great. Those are the only questions that I have that aren't confidential, and we're right here at noon. So why don't we plan to regroup at 1 p.m. Mountain Time for the confidential session? I really only have the question that Mike had asked up at the beginning. The relationship between sales and design day is one thing I have highlighted. And then I have, maybe 10 questions about the project prioritization. So, I don't think we're going to be going till 4, but maybe an hour's worth of questions. Does that work for everyone?
Sounds great.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Have a good lunch, and we'll be back in an hour.
Thank you.
Sorry. Just before we go, Wendy, is there anything that you need from anyone for this confidential session? I wanted to check with you on that.
So I've looked through the NDAs that have been signed in the proceeding, but if Atmos wants to do that themselves, then please feel free to check that list. And that way, and have it handy for the confidential session. That way we can ask Atmos's representation to confirm that everybody in the confidential session should be there.
Will do.
Thank you.
All right, then we'll all be back in an hour. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, welcome back from lunch. I'm going to give us another minute here until I see Wendy Rosati log in, just to make sure we're all squared away for the confidential session. But once she is online, we'll get going.
As we're waiting, could I get someone from Atmos to just double check the participants that are on the screen, that they're allowed to stay in?
Yeah, I've confirmed.
Okay, thanks. And Jesse, once we do get started, it'll just take me a minute to verify on the webcast that it's been paused, because there is a delay, so it'll just take a minute for that to happen. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm just saying I'm going to send Wendy an email quickly. Yeah, I don't think it makes sense to proceed without her, but yeah, just hang tight, everyone. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, Wendy. Welcome back. I'm just hoping that you can sort of help us get moved into the confidential session this afternoon. So if you want to come on and just sort of move us towards that, we've already confirmed that everyone here is supposed to be in that session. So I don't know if you have anything to say to kick us off. I didn't want to move into that without you. You're muted. No worries.
Yes, sorry for being a couple minutes late. Yes, there's no special words we need to say, so we can go ahead and move into that when Stephanie's ready.
Okay, just give me a second. I'll let you know as soon as we're ready.
It's now streaming, so it looks like we're probably back. So again, we just had a confidential session. I don't know if people are watching that. Welcome back. We are concluding our questions for the day. Neither Mr. Mendelson nor I have any further questions, and are wondering if anyone from the Atmos team has any further questions.
Looks like Mr. Dixon has a question or a comment, a statement.
Not a question, a statement. I see Ms. Falcon has arrived from CEO, and I had notified them because I was concerned they had submitted comments. So I just want to mention that they are here, and I don't know if they have any overall comments or things that you might want to at least give them an opportunity to express.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Falcon, any questions from CEO on any aspects of the gas infrastructure plan that we've gone over today?
Hi, thank you, Tom. But no, CEO has no questions or comments at this time. Thank you.
Great. All right, anyone from the Atmos team, we really appreciate you guys taking the time. Any questions or comments or things we missed that you want to tell us about?
No questions for me. I just want to say thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to allow us to kind of come here and discuss our GIP filing. So look forward to continuing the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you all. Have a great rest of your days.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Bye. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much.